Right, let's make a start in. So, as was just said, my name's Garth. I'm a developer advocate at JetBrains, very active in organizing conferences and meetups and doing speaking and so on. There we are. And we're here to talk about Ktor. So, anybody know who the person there is in the bottom right? Yes? Yay! It's as if you were one of my colleagues. That's amazing, yes. So Cody is the mascot for Kotlin, and Ktor is Cody approved, yeah? So what is Ktor? So Ktor is a really awesome framework for asynchronous client and server applications. Must be says so on the website. But there are an awful lot of microservices frameworks out there. So can I ask, anybody actually using Ktor at the moment? By a show of hands? A few people, very good, excellent. So there's an awful lot of choice out there when it comes to server-side frameworks. So even if you just restricted yourself to the JVM, this would be some of the choice that you would have. So there's an awful lot of choice out there. So what makes Ktor different? So my mission for this talk is to persuade those of you who aren't currently using Ktor that it's worth a look. It's worth a look-see. So I would say there are two things that make Ktor worthwhile. First of all, the core values that the whole thing is built around, and then secondly, the shiny things. Now everybody's probably here for the shiny things, but it's worth spending a minute or two on the core values. So if you belong to the Ktor team, you're kind of on a mission, and your mission is to keep Ktor as minimalist, clicker, yep, as flexible, as simple, and as fast as possible. And to try to avoid any boilerplate on our part or on your part, any duplication, and especially to avoid magic. If you wish to be a wizard, you do not get into the Ktor team, because if you were to try and express the slogan in one pithy sentence, it would be no magic, no magic at all. So you can think of the Ktor values as being the antithesis of convention over configuration. So in a convention over configuration framework, you have a plugin, an extension, whatever you want to call it, and you set that on the class path, and conventions, automatically come into being, and the framework starts doing things for you. And that's very, very cool. I mean, I like to think of this like making a cake. So using a convention over configuration framework is where you need to bake a cake, and you have certain pre-packaged ingredients. You have sauces and mixes and icings and fondants and so on, and you produce a wonderful, delicious, really nice cake really quickly. But then somebody says, look, I'm deathly allergic to almonds. Were there any almonds in any of these ingredients? And you kind of go, no, not entirely sure. Yeah. So I remember way back in the day, I was doing JEE. Actually, I was doing J2EE, and I was trying to plug together 5 different frameworks. And I realized suddenly that I wasn't using the distributed transactions manager that I thought I was using, and then I wasn't using a distributed transactions manager at all, and then I wasn't using a transactions manager, and then I started getting really worried. Yeah. So it's not that convention over configuration is wrong. There are many different roads up the mountain, but eventually when we get to the top of the mountain, we all need to understand everything that we're doing. We all need to make sense of all the conventions. And Ktor is very much for people who want to know absolutely everything that's going into the cake mix right from the get-go. So that if that's your personal approach to life, well then Ktor may be of interest to you. So even though you've put something on the class path, even though you've made something available in theory to Ktor, if you haven't explicitly installed it, it's not going to be there. That's the philosophy. And you'll see this philosophy at work as we go through all of these different shiny things. So in just a minute, I'm going to set out a case study, a very basic case study, and then to that case study, we're going to add the shiny things. So the shiny things I'm going to show you in Ktor are testing, dependency injection, and then we'll flip the front end to GraphQL, We'll use WebSockets. We'll compile the thing natively. We'll add OpenTelemetry, big theme at this conference, yeah, and deservedly so, which made me very happy. So yeah, I'm on trend, yeah. So we'll add OpenTelemetry. We'll play around with fine-grained control, and then we'll summarize. So that's an awful lot of Shiny. This talk did start out as a live coded talk. I was saying, yeah, you know, I'll show this and show that and so on. It kind of grew when I wasn't looking. So there is a repo with sample projects for everything, and everything starts from the same foundation. So I know it's late in the day. If your attention wanders a little bit, don't worry. Each of these Shiny demos will restart from the same foundation. So you kind of take one out and join in on the next one if you want. Yep. So just move on. Here's the repo here. So please feel free to clone that. Have a play with it in your copious free time, and ask me if you have any questions. By the way, don't worry, the organizers are going to give out all of these slides, so all of this material will be available to you. I'm also going to make reference to the official Ktor demos, which go into a lot more detail about all the different things I'm going to touch on. Yay! So what's the case study going to be? Well, you know the way in every Marvel superhero movie, there's the moment where the hero or heroine needs to get detailed information about some suspect, and they just type in the details, and type in the person's name, and all the details of their name suddenly appear, okay? So let's say we need to write an application like that, and there are no ethical considerations because we're a superhero or heroine, yeah? So for the next 45 minutes, you can be whichever superhero you like, but I'm the person at the front, so I'm Batman. Okay? Right. So let's start out with finding out what questions somebody has asked in Stack Overflow. That seems like a good starting point. So here's the URL template here. All we need to do is take the 2 bits in orange and put in the user ID and the site name. So I'll do this in the only way it can ethically be done. I'll use myself as the guinea pig. So here's my user ID, and the site, of course, is Stack Overflow, and you can see that I've asked 9 questions in Stack Overflow. So we're going to get back some data. It's going to be a table. In the table, there's going to be a property called items. That's going to be an array of 9 subtables, 1 for every question that I asked. And then there'll be an awful lot of details, you know, about each individual question. Huge big table of stuff. All that we care about is that in there somewhere is the title of the question that was asked and the ID. Yeah, so those are the things that we want to magpie out. So for all of our demos, the little case study is you've been given the ID of somebody from Stack Overflow, you've gone out, you fetch the list of questions that they've asked, and for each question you magpie the title and the question ID. That's the job of work that we've set ourselves. So how are we going to do this with Ktor? Well, a great way to start, I knew you'd like this, yeah, is prototyping with notebooks. So if you're familiar with the Kotlin ecosystem, last year we introduced support for notebooks in Kotlin. So who's seen like Jupyter notebooks and Python and stuff? Yeah. So if you've ever seen anything like that, then you know what this is. You have a notebook, you have cells. In the cells, you put Kotlin code. You can run the cells individually or all in one go. So we can take a Kotlin notebook, just right-click and say New Kotlin Notebook, and then we can start writing some Ktor code. And there are 3 big benefits to using notebooks. Number 1, at the top of the notebook, or further down if you like, you can say Use Ktor Client. And this avoids any malarkey with Maven or Gradle or anything like that. So whenever they were designing notebooks, they put in shortcuts for popular libraries. So we just need to put that in the notebook, and we can start using the Ktor Client. And then in this particular case, because we're doing rapid prototyping, we're allowed a little bit of magic. Yeah, so remember I said that the rule of Ktor is that things are only there if you explicitly ask for them. Well, in notebooks, there's this notebook HTTP client, and that's basically the Ktor client with all the optional features turned on. So whenever you're doing rapid prototyping, you don't want the tooling saying, you haven't done X, you didn't explicitly ask for Y, you know, and so on. And then finally, there's this super useful feature, only available in notebooks, deserialized JSON. So the first time you send a request to the server, we're going to get our JSON back, And remember, we know that what you're going to have is a table with a property called items, and the value of items will be an array of subtables, and each of those subtables will have like 15 or 20 properties, including the title and the question ID. Well, all of that information will be captured in anonymous types. So we'll have anonymous types created on the fly, and these will let us strongly type the data. So this is it, yeah? This is all you need to do in the notebook to go out and fetch the data from the server. So as we've said at the top, we bring in the library, and then I create a little helper function called build client, and that takes the built-in HTTP client and gives it the default URL. There we go there. And then we create some variables to represent the data. We use our client to send a GET request to the server, and the data that comes back, we say deserialize JSON, and it converts it into anonymous types for us. And then the real payoff is at the bottom there. I can say data.items. That gives me the collection of items. I can map over it. For each one, I can lift out the title, and then I can just print those. Yeah, so that's all we need to do to get the data in the Kotlin notebook. So that's pretty cool. So for more information about notebooks, there's a bunch of good YouTube videos online. These two in particular, introductory one at the top, more detailed one underneath. So I recommend both of those to you. Right, but we're not doing notebooks. This isn't a notebook talk. Yeah? So that shows you how you could use the Ktor client, but we want to use it within a service of our own. Remember, we want to go out and create a service which is going to query Stack Overflow. So what do we need to do? Well, we're going to, first of all, create a question type. Easy peasy, we can do that. And then we want to create a Stack Exchange client type. And that's going to wrap up our Ktor HTTP client. And when requested, at point B there, we want the Ktor client to request the data from Stack Overflow, and then magpie out those IDs and titles, the things we really want, put those into a list of questions, and return that back to the calling code. And what's the calling code going to be? Well, it's going to be code inside a root, and that root is going to be in an instance of Ktor, and that instance of Ktor is going to be living on top of a web server. So that's the architecture that we want to build. So let's just do it. The little boxes on the top right there show you the progress. So point number 1, build the question type. Easy peasy. Point number 2, start building our Stack Exchange client. So this is going to wrap up the Ktor HTTP client, and we pass in the low-level engine that's used for networking. Remember that little bit, because that will be important in a minute. And then we're going to go out and get information from the server. I didn't know it when I wrote this code, but it turns out that Stack Overflow returns the information to you zipped up. So we're going to need to unzip the information that comes back. And remember the rule, there is no magic. Yeah? So we have to explicitly ask for support for unzipping the content. So we need to put that highlighted bit in there. So having done that, we can write a little function called fetch raw data, and that uses our Ktor client to send a GET request to the server and return the response. And that little helper function there, fetch raw data, we can use it inside fetch questions. And this is our workhorse. This is the function that's going to do most of the work. So we'll pass in the ID for Stack Overflow. We'll try and fetch the data. If the status of the response isn't okay, we'll return an empty list. Otherwise, what do we want to do? We want to magpie out the data. So remember, we're getting the data back from the server. Inside that data, there's a collection called items. And then for each of the items in that collection, there's going to be a question title and an ID. So these helper functions here are being used to lift out the low-level data from the response. But where did they come from? Yeah? Well, the clue's in the line above there where it says data frame. So we're using a really useful library called the data frame library. Again, if you're from a Python background, you'll have heard the name before. This lets us load in data, CSV, XML, database data, whatever, and represent it as a series of nested tables. Yeah? So using the data frame library, we can load in some arbitrary data and represent it in a strongly typed way as a set of nested tables. And these things that I mentioned before, items, question ID, and question title, well, these are strongly typed accessor functions. So we can use the data frames library to create these functions, and a little bit like lenses, you know, for people who have done pure FP, yeah? And these will let us drill into the data and pull back the stuff that we need. Woohoo! For more information on the data frame library, really good talk. Kotlin Conf was just a couple of weeks ago. Lots of really, really good content. The talks will be online soon. So whenever they pop up, if you want to know more about data frames, that's a superb talk there. So I've got my function to retrieve the data. Where did we say that would be put? We said that we'd put that inside a route. So we've got some routing here where we're saying, okay, if I send a GET request to /fetch_question/user ID, well then this is how we process it. So first of all, get back the user ID. If anything goes wrong, send an error down to the client. Otherwise, use our Stack Exchange client to fetch the questions from Stack Overflow, and assuming everything goes well, respond down to the client with a list of questions. On the other hand, in the event that an exception is thrown, return an error. So that's it. You know, that's the routing inside our service. And finally, we have to put that service inside a web server. So this is the standard boilerplate for standing up Ktor. You pick the server that you want it to run inside, Netty in this case, the port that you want to run it on, and the helper function to start everything up. So that's going to be our module function. And in there, we call configure serialization. Remember, that's where the routing is. And we pass in the low-level networking engine that we want the Ktor client to use. Yay. And if we run it, it works. Yeah. So if we stand that up and send a request to /fetch_question/Stack Overflow ID, then we'll get some data back. You know, it'll work for us. So again, these are the steps that we work through. For those of you who have done Ktor, I apologize. You know, I've been teaching my grandmother to suck eggs there, yeah. But for those of you who aren't familiar with Ktor, these are the stages that you would work through. So having seen how you create a Ktor service, on with the shiny, okay? By the way, I wanted a picture of Cody, the mascot, being absolutely besotted by a shiny feature, yeah? But ChatGPT came back and said, Cody is copyrighted, that would be bad, you know? And I can't teach ChatGPT that I'm a member of JetBrains, unfortunately, but the ChatGPT did said, I can draw you a cute bear. Would you like the cute bear? And they went, yeah, I'll go with the cute bear, you know, hence the cute bear. Right, so shiny number one is testing. Testing in Ktor is really good. What are our test cases? Well, they're the ones you see here. Valid ID gives us a list of questions. Unknown ID, an empty list. Invalid ID, an error code. You know, those are our very basic tests. So how would we validate that those work inside our Ktor service? What we do is we can say test application brace brace. And as I like to think of it, that gives us a ship in a bottle. So that gives us a captive instance of Ktor, not running against a web server. So then we can use the application block to configure it whatever way we like, and then we can just start hitting our endpoints. So let's look at that for real. So we want to check that a valid user ID gives us a list of results. So we'll say test application brace brace, application brace brace. Inside there, we'll call configure serialization. Remember, that's the function that sets up the routing. And then we'll use the built-in test client to send a request to the server. And we'll check that we get back a 200 and a list of 9 results. So cool, yeah? So remember, we're going here and we're directing a test request to our server, and it in turn is going out and calling Stack Overflow. Yay. If I pass in an invalid ID, I should get an error back. Similarly, if I pass in an ID that doesn't exist, and this was 5 very busy minutes of playing with Stack Overflow to find an ID that doesn't exist. So if I put in 91111, yeah, then that account doesn't exist, so we should get back an empty list. So these tests will all run and pass. Yeah. Now, if there's anybody in the room whose profession is QA, is there? Anybody? Any QA? Yes. Thank you, sir, for your patience and not throwing any furniture at me, okay? So, yeah, if you work in QA, you'll have been worrying the furniture and, you'll have feel inclined to throw heavy things at me, yeah? Because that's an absolutely terrible test, okay? So that test still called out to Stack Overflow. You could be super, super generous and call it an integration test at best, okay? So what happens if I close my account? What happens if, God forbid, as an advocate, I do a day's work and ask a 10th question, what happens if that 9119191, what happens if that ID goes live? Any of these things, okay? So our test is terrifyingly fragile because we're testing a service that uses a service, yeah? So what we need to do is we need to go and mock out that remote destination. So how would we do that in Ktor? Well, first of all, we'd send a request, we'd get back a response, and we'd kind of tinker with that response to make it really good, for the purposes of testing. And then we'd save that in a file. And let's say that file is sampleresponse.json. And then we can write a helper function to read that in the means that Ktor likes. It's called a byte read channel, but that's just a low-level networking type. So having written that helper function, we can then go out and mock the remote service. So you see here I can create a mock engine, and I'm going to say, okay, if somebody is trying to fetch a URL that contains 123, and it's a GET request, then return the sample data. I would if my clicker hadn't stopped. There we are. So if the path of the request contains 123, and it's a GET request, we'll then go out and return our sample data. And now, I can go out and I can use this mock engine instead of my regular engine. So what I've just done is I've bypassed the part where we're calling the service. So I can have the same kind of test as before. I can say fetch questions, now it's 1, 2, 3, because that's what it's expecting. And I get back a list of questions that I control. And the size should just be 3, and the title should be what you see there. So I've effectively insulated my tests from any changes to Stack Overflow. Cool. But wait, there's more. In all these shiny things, there's a more section. There's lots of other ways of mocking things out. You can combine this functionality with other testing frameworks in Kotlin, like CoTest and so on. You can right-click on a route, and the IDE will generate the test for you. And if you want to fill in some details of the test, well, the AI assistant will help with that. So you see here in the IDE, I've got my route, and I've right-clicked on it, and I've got these options here. The one highlighted, create test for Ktor route, and down the bottom there, there's also the AI actions that would do some code generation. So cool, that's shiny number 1. Which leads nicely on to number 2, which is dependency injection. So I know DI is a little bit of a controversial subject, but for the next 5 minutes, as the Zen folks say, empty your cup for fresh tea. Okay, so I'll try and convince you that DI is a good idea potentially, in your microservice. But it's always up to you. But in the last one that we saw, there was a bit of an architectural problem. So we were taking this HTTP client engine and we were passing it down through multiple layers. Bit of an annoyance, won't scale. So let me just show you what I mean. So we had our module function, that's the startup function, and in there we were creating an instance of the CIO networking engine, and then that got passed into configure serialization. That got passed into the Stack Exchange client, and then from there into our HTTP client, okay? So, in the case of this toy application, it's okay, but that's definitely not going to scale. So we can introduce, if we want, a DI container. So let's say we want to go out and use Koin. Again, it's going to be an optional feature, so we need a plugin. So we're going to use a plugin to bring it in, and then it'll give us a DSL for declaring dependencies and a way to inject them. So this is how we do it here. In our module setup function, we say install Koin. That brings in the plugin. then we declare the dependencies that we want to inject. So in this case, we want to inject just a single dependency, and that's an instance of the CIO engine. So once we've got that declared, we don't need to pass it in through configure serialization. Just when we've got our Stack Exchange client, we declare that that extends Koin component, and then we can use inject there to pass it in. And that's it. You know, that's all you need to do to enable the DI. We can do the same thing very easily in our tests. Yeah, so we could do it like that, or also we could just declare everything in line. So let's say here we want to use that mock engine from the previous topic. So we can say install Koin, then within there we can declare our Koin module, we can declare our dependency in the mock engine and so on. You know, we can just squeeze it all into one place if we like. But either way, we're using DI in our production code, and we're also using it in our tests. But wait, there's more. So you can have multiple Koin containers, one or more per Ktor service. You can scope your Koin components to a request in Ktor. Ktor modules can load different Koin modules on the fly, and the Koin container has a whole series of events that you can subscribe to. So there's lots of interesting things going on. And if you're worried about becoming dependent on a particular container, in our roadmap for 2024, we announced a general purpose way of using DI containers. So there'll be a vendor-agnostic way of saying, I wish to use DI within your Ktor services. Cool. Right, number 3, let's change the front end. So we've been doing REST. Let's flip it now to using GraphQL instead. So let's say for the purposes of testing, we want to have this graphical client here, and we want to put in a GraphQL query asking for the questions and get the list of 9 questions back. How would we do that? Well, you've guessed it. We're going to go out and we're going to install a plugin. So instead of configure serialization, we'll now have configure GraphQL. We'll install the GraphQL plugin, and then we'll give it a little bit of information. So we'll say, first of all, this list of packages contains the types that we want to expose and marshal through GraphQL. And then these 2 types here, these represent the queries that we want to run. So these are just types that extend from query. So we'll have a hello query that returns some standard text, but then the one at the bottom, that's the one that does the real work. So you see inside there, we've got a function called questions that will turn into the query. It'll take the user ID, and we'll use our client, our Stack Exchange client, to go out and fetch the questions as before. So the only thing that we need to do now is install the routing, but the GraphQL way. So we'll turn on support for GraphQL queries. We'll embed the user interface for the purposes of the demo, and we'll ask it to generate the schema from the types mentioned above. And if you do that, this is what you get. You know, you can go to your service /graphical, you can run your hello query, you can run your questions query. This is awesome. I thought this would take me all day. I got it done within 20 minutes. Yay, yep. And even better, this wasn't written by JetBrains. Yeah. So this GraphQL plugin was contributed by these folks here who did a talk back at Kotlin Conf 23. So this is online right now. So if you want to know more about how that plugin works and the types of things you can do, really recommend that talk to you. Cool. Next one, let's switch the front end again. Let's do WebSockets. So let's say whenever we submit the query up to the server, we want to stream down the responses. Obviously, a very, very silly thing to do if you've only ever asked 9 questions. Yeah? But let's say I'd asked 9,000 questions or 90,000 questions, and we needed to generate one every half second, you know, or something like that. Yeah? Well, then WebSockets would be appropriate. Can I ask, who's been bitten by WebSockets in the past? Yeah. Yeah, yes, yeah. So WebSockets can be a very, very scary topic. You may well have been bitten by them in the past, yeah. And there's a reason for this, yeah, which is that a lot of web frameworks were around for 5 or 10 years before WebSockets came along. So they kind of settled into a really good architecture that people liked, and then they had to adapt to web services. Yeah? Ktor is more modern. All I mean by that is it was invented after WebSockets, you know, so they got to see them coming, and they included them in the architecture. So it's a matter of timing more than anything else. So with Ktor, you just say install WebSockets, and remember there's this no magic rule. Because yes, we want WebSockets, but we haven't said we're sending JSON up and down. So you still have to install a converter there. Yeah. And then, having done that, we can do our routing. We can say WebSocket/questions. So we want to wait until somebody sends us a user. That's the receive deserialized bit. And then we'll go out and fetch the questions corresponding to that user and write them down to the client. And for the purposes of the demo, we'll impose a 1-second delay, you know, between writing each question. And that proves that the WebSocket functionality works. Yay. And the client, by the way, is deliberately ugly. I just wrote it in normal HTML and JavaScript. Whoops, went too far. So quick word of wisdom from somebody who started off in Corba. I'm not going to say who did Corba. Nobody in here did Corba. Who knows what Corba was? And that's what I thought, yeah. So for somebody who's been doing distributed systems for a while, never use the same vendor's technology at both ends, yeah? Because any mistakes they made will be covered up in their own code, you know? If you want to know if a vendor's distributed systems library works, we'll install their stuff at one end and something utterly different at another, you know? So anytime I'm playing with some kind of WebSockets library on the server, I like to have plain old vanilla JavaScript and HTML on the client, you know, because that way you know for sure if it really works. So this was actually used. As I say, we had Kotlin Conf a couple of weeks ago, and we were using Ktor plus WebSockets plus WebAssembly on the client, which ran on Android, iOS, and in the browser as well. That was the WebAssembly bit. So there's an awful lot of power in this combination of Ktor, WebSockets, and WebAssembly. But the WebAssembly bit is really for another talk. Right, next bit, Kotlin multi-platform, yay. So the Ktor client is fully multi-platform. What does that mean? Well, it means we've got a native compiler where you can compile it for iOS. We've got the JVM compiler, of course, and then we've got the WebAssembly compiler. You know, so the Ktor client is fully multi-platform. Ktor server supports both JVM and native, so you can compile it to a native executable. So the first thing about writing multi-platform front ends, we did an awful lot of that at the end of last year. So if you're interested in how to use Kotlin multi-platform to write front ends that run on iOS and Android and WebAssembly and so on, I refer you to all of these talks and the associated documentation. But let's leave that for now. Let's leave that aside and just think about taking a Ktor service and compiling it natively. So you get an executable that you can just double-click on and run. You know, no virtual machine involved. So what we would do there is we would change our build file. So we change our build file so that in this case it's macOS and x64 specific. So we specify precisely what we're compiling for, and we're going to be using the Kotlin native compiler. We'll need to change our engine. So up until now, we've been using that CIO networking engine, apart from the mocking bit. We need to switch to a different engine. And also, we can't use data frames anymore, yeah? But we can go in and we can use Kotlin X serialization, because that's a Kotlin multi-platform library. So that'll be a little bit more low level in our coding, but it'll still let us pull out what we need. And if we do that, we'll get a version of our service that starts up in 0.003 seconds. Yay! You know, so as with technologies like GraalVM, that's the payoff. You know, you get something that just boom, just starts up. Yay! But same results as before. Yay! Next one. Who's been to a talk today that mentioned OpenTelemetry? Yay, almost everybody, okay? Very much the theme of the conference, okay? So you already know what OpenTelemetry is. These days we're deploying clouds of microservices, and I know people, advocates from other organizations, of course, who do the talks where they go, do you know where your microservices are tonight? You know, do you really? You know, because there's all these horror stories of companies just losing track of microservices that are, you know, out there somewhere in their cloud spending money. So these days, observability is really, really important. We need all our microservices publishing information about what they're up to. So that's a vital component of what used to be DevOps, and then it became DevSecOps, and then DevFinOps, DevFinSecOps. You know, really, really important. Yeah. So OpenTelemetry, as you'll have heard by people much more experienced in the field than me, it gives you a universal solution, specifications that apply across platforms and industries, APIs, SDKs, and so on. And they give us a plugin to integrate with Ktor. You know, that's what we're concerned with here. So we can say install Ktor server tracing, and then we can signal arbitrary information. You know, we can publish information about what we're doing. So in this case, we'll go out and we'll publish as part of our attributes the user ID. So if I create a version of my service using the OpenTelemetry plugin, well then I can find it using a dashboard like Jaeger. So you see there, we can see it's there. We can automatically see all the requests that were sent. We can see the details of each request, the URL, the time it took to process, and so on. And crucially, we can also see the attributes that we're exporting. You know, in this case, the user ID. So yes, you can integrate OpenTelemetry into your Ktor services. Obviously, this is just the start. You know, rapidly evolving area, much more to be done there. Yeah, but we're on our way. And finally, last one, wanted to finish on one that was slightly simple, but showed a full stack architecture. Let's say we want to be able to retry requests. Okay, so, yep. So you can customize any aspect of Ktor. Let's say we want to be able to use the Ktor client to send a request until it succeeds. So we want to back off, you know, in an increasingly long period of time until the request succeeds. So I've got a compose multi-platform client here sending a request to the server, and I've set up the server so that only each fourth request will go through. Okay? So how does that work on the server side? Dead simple, one if statement. Yeah. So you see there we're saying if call count mod 4 is 0, let the request through. You know, otherwise we're going to signal an error. Well, what about on the client? Well, when we're setting up the Ktor client, you've guessed it, we install a plugin, and that's going to be the request retry plugin. And we say that we want to do a number of retries up to 5. And we specify what our policy is for scheduling the delay. You know, that'll make the retry functionality happen. But then in order to log what's going on in the UI, then we're going to use a different plugin, the HTTP send one, to intercept each request and log it, you know, inside the GUI, just so that we can see what's going on. And then having done that, we use the client as usual. We go out and create our user interface using Compose multi-platform, rows, columns, widgets, you know, it's all in there. I apologize that it doesn't look very flashy, yeah, but it goes out and it does the job just fine. The most interesting bit about this project is actually the wizard that was used to generate it. Can I ask who's seen this wizard before? Nope, have a look at this. Yeah, if you look at one thing from this talk, yeah, go out and have a look at kmp.jetbrains.com. So this is our wizard for creating Kotlin multi-platform applications. So if you wish to create one or more Ktor services, hit that server tag. Yeah, if you want to play with WebAssembly, hit the web tag. If you want to write a front end, you know, a nice looking user interface and Compose multi-platform, pick your poison. So you can say Android, iOS, desktop, any combination. And then what you'll get is you'll get a project with multiple modules and source sets. Yeah. So for example, there'll be a server module for your Ktor services. There'll be a shared module for the information being shared between client and server. You'll have Compose app and that's where the code for your user interface lives. So there'll be a source set in there for Android, for iOS, for desktop, if you asked for all three, and then a fourth module for all the shared code. Yeah, so don't do all of it in one go. Okay, so for your first full platform application, maybe just pick only Android and server if you know Android, or only desktop and server if you're not familiar with mobile and so on. Yeah, but you can start big and work up from there. So that's a really good wizard to get you started, and there are a bunch of online tutorials I can refer you to. And then the final thing, Ktor 3.0 is in the pipeline with extra shiny, okay? So all the shiny I've shown you is available now. Extra shiny, they're trying to get rid of all the bespoke networking inside Ktor and replace it with Kotlin X.io, this Kotlin multi-platform I.O. library that we're trying to standardize against. And that will make it much easier for anybody who wants to integrate with Ktor. There's going to be support for gRPC. There's going to be a plugin for managed transactions. Lots of good stuff. You know, see the roadmap for details. So in conclusion, there's a lot of shiny in Ktor. You know, this is all the shiny that we've walked through here. Things we've left out. We have our own database access library called Exposed, which is awesome, yeah, but also we talk to everything else you've ever heard of, yeah, and asynchronicity, I think that's right, yes, concurrency and parallelism, yeah, is enabled using coroutines, but yeah, we're not going to go there in the, 3 minutes and 20 seconds I have remaining.
We have 10 more minutes.
Sorry?
10 more minutes.
10 more minutes, yeah, I'm still not going to go near it because it's too scary. So if you're interested in database access, again, Chantal did an amazing talk on the Exposed library at KotlinConf, being published very soon. Really good. And there's another one there in Coroutines. I am kidding. If you want to know about Coroutines, come talk to me after the delivery. Yeah. And on behalf of the Ktor team, they asked me to pass on a huge thank you to everybody who's contributed so far. So to all the users, the reviewers, people who've given feedback and contributions and so on. And the focus going forwards is on building the ecosystem, because the team can't write all the plugins, and the team definitely don't want to write all the plugins. Okay, so you know, so far we've seen plugins like the GraphQL one and the OpenTelemetry one and so on, and those came from outside contributors. And this year we launched a little plugin registry. So what that means is that if you produce a Ktor plugin, you can publish the details to us. We'll check it out. If it's good enough, we'll include it in all the project wizards, and it'll have the same standing as any of the plugins produced by the Ktor team. You know, so the focus going forwards is really, really strongly on building the community. So just to sum up, Ktor is a great choice. Hopefully I've convinced you of that, or at least have a look at it, yeah? Albeit within a crowded marketplace. We would never deny that. You know, you folks have a huge amount of choice when it comes to server-side frameworks. And the way that we're trying to win is by playing the long game. So no fad features, no rushing things into production. The idea is sustained progress. We're playing the long game. And we're trying to grow the framework in terms of the features, in terms of the community, and in terms of the resources. So please, 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 you know, come up to me now. I'm about tomorrow. I'm doing office hours. If anybody's interested, just get in touch with the organizers, and we can grab some space, and I can show you some things or answer some questions. And that's it. That's my show. Thank you very much.